Hello, viewers. Today we'll be discussing the topic critical views on capitalism. We need to understand that capitalism has both its supporters as well as opponents. Capitalism has been much appreciated, at the same time, has been much criticized. Therefore, it is imperative to understand why capitalism has been attacked on various perspectives. Students, we also need to understand that the history of the critique of capitalism is as old as the history of capitalism itself. In Europe, at least, anti capitalism has been very strong over centuries, but it has not impeded the rise and development of capitalism in Europe. Since its emergence in the late 1700s, modern capitalism has been the focus of intense controversy. On the one hand, capitalist economic development has been extraordinary. On the other hand, capitalism has been prone to crisis and is also associated with a striking degree of inequality. Therefore, much of the political controversy is driven by the conflict between those who have gained or stand to gain from the rapid economic development of capitalism and those whose fortunes are threatened by capitalist advance and its cyclical crisis. Criticism of capitalism is thus old, and we need to understand why capitalism has been subjected to such intense controversies. But before that, students, we need to understand what is capitalism and what are the features of capitalism. Capitalism is considered to be an economic system which is mainly organized around corporate or private ownership of goods and means of production. Secondly, competition in a free market is another feature of capitalist development. Almost all wealth is privately owned in a capitalist economy. There is little, if none, state involvement in market exchanges, production, as well as various economic transactions. Production, distribution, management of wealth are controlled by corporations or privates. Such social and economic system is based on the acknowledgement and primacy of individual rights and private property. The purest form of capitalism is free market. Emphasis is put on individual achievements rather than on the quality of production. Politically, it is considered to be a system of laissez-faire system. However, students, please note that philosophers across centuries have given their different views on capitalism. Some believed in capitalism as the process of societal growth and development. For others, capitalism is inimical to welfare. There are a third number of political philosophers who believe that the restrictions on capitalist production should be done away with in the interest of individual freedom and autonomy. However, students, to systematically organize our discussion on the criticisms of capitalism, I have divided the different capitalist critiques into four broad segments. They are the social criticism, the artistic criticism, the conservative criticism, and the ecological criticism. These are the four broad segments into which the capitalist critique can be broadly segmentalized. Now let us move on with the first one, the social criticism. But before that, students, it is imperative to understand the relationship between capitalism and critique of capitalism. And political philosophers and economists have tried to visit a tendency called spirit of capitalism. But what is the spirit of capitalism? The interaction between capitalism on the one hand and criticisms of capitalism on the other hand has given rise to the spirit of capitalism of a given period. The spirit of capitalism is an ideological configuration situated in space and time. So, the spirit of capitalism students have evolved with the evolution of capitalism as a form of economic system. The spirit of capitalism operates both as a source of understanding and legitimization of capitalism as an active constraint on capitalism, because legitimization can only work as long as reality is not too far from the ideal model. This is where criticism has a role to play, students. Its accusations force capitalism to mend or justify these ways. Because too much of capitalism would be too difficult for capitalism to survive on its own. Therefore, whenever there is a critique of capitalism, capitalism tries to mend its ways. Because if it does not mend its ways on the basis of criticism, failure to do so will either cost the legitimacy of capitalism itself and ultimately the operative capacity of the capitalist system will be jeopardized. Based on the spirit of capitalism, we come to the first critique of capitalism, and that is the social criticism. When it comes to social criticism, we have to give the major contribution to the Marxists. The social criticism reached an unprecedented scale with the work and position taken by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, forcing everyone to take a position. Through the scope and depth of the writings, Karl Marx's analysis remains a central critique of capitalism. The history of social criticism is thus the history of the study of Marx, how his analysis was adopted to a changing economic world, and how his ideas were hybridized with new theoretical frameworks. Social criticism is actually a response to the real situation of labor in the capitalist world. That is, exploitation which contains and explains the inequality between the working class as well as the capitalist rich, domination of work as well as alienation of labor. So the social criticism basically focuses on exploitation, domination, and alienation. The social criticism is multifaceted, with different subgroups fighting tooth and nail over questions such as role and relevance of the state, trade unions, general strike, revolution or reform, and the necessary degree of liberty as a principle of social organization. Now, there are two groups which have emerged within the social criticism. The first made the exploitation issue as its main battleground. Its supporters thought that collectivization of production means an elimination of market mechanisms would put an end to exploitation by abolishing private monopolization of the surplus and price setting determined by competition. This was the path chosen by the socialist countries that was unable to abolish either wage labor or the bureaucratic and hierarchical system of the state and could only distribute economic flows differently. Economic inequality is considered to be the root of all exploitation. It is said to be the mother of all evils and should therefore the target of action and the main focal point for the capitalist social critique. It is because capital is initially unequally distributed that some people must work to live for others, and others will be using their capital to buy machines, resources, labor, and combine them to make products that will be sold in a profit in the market. People endowed with capital can make investments and have the time to wait for returns on their investments. This is the cycle through which capitalism develops and prospers. The initial inequality in ownership is also the source of the domination of capital because it pays. Capitalism can command labor and make it undesirable, and definitely these undesirable aspects cripples creative abilities and capacities of people. to the second group. The second group considered that the most urgent need was to release labor from the oppression of the capitalist, and fought for all forms of heteronomy affecting the worker. And if you look into the worker's condition in a capitalist system, he never chooses what he will work, for whom he will work, what type of work he will be doing. Therefore, the labor has no autonomy and freedom to decide on the type of work and the labor that he would be performing, because he is always in a position to be dominated. He is always in a position that he must obey the capitalist. For his liberation, collectivization without elimination is simply a continuation of oppression by other means. Therefore, the state planning should replace market forces, but definitely if you look into USSR and other countries, socialist countries particularly, state planning that replaced market practices actually facilitated their and increased their oppression. Moving to the second criticism, the artistic criticism, and the name suggests, the artistic criticism actually alienated the worker or the labor from his artistic expressions. Let us try to understand how and why does it form an important critique of capitalism. The artistic criticism shows very little concern for the social question of the worker's lot. Its main concern is the transformation in the lifestyles in a capitalist society. The whole life of a human being finds itself shaped by capitalist processes. Not only the working life of the worker, but even his consumption styles. Education. Everyday life is taken over by the capitalist machine. So the worker loses his artistic creativity. This is one. Secondly, he also loses his freedom in terms of his lifestyle, his consumption pattern, even education, because everything is taken over by the capitalist model of production and distribution. The artistic criticism is basically a criticism of alienation, alienating the worker from the creative processes. The imprisonment of the human being in a world of commodities, we call it commodification. This is an awkward critical position, and it requires the critique to look down from above on the general conditioning of the workers and the society. It knows that a more refined culture exists and that it is possible to gain access to authentic pleasures that have not been manufactured by the mass society. The artistic criticism will push for elitist cultural policies that do not depend on industries, and school curricula focusing on education of taste and artistic practices. But what we find in the capitalist system is mass production, commodification, where you find large-scale production system taking away the refinement of taste and cultural practices. It takes action. How does the artistic critique work? It takes action through creative hijacking of advertising messages, festive occupation of the symbols of modern society, a refusal to consume the products of capitalism, and possibly modern education and health services. So artistic critique focuses on the need to go back and relish our culture and rather not be a part of this commodification culture that exists currently. It believes that we should not commercialize our festivals but should look into our own taste and cultures and preferences individually and not as mass production system. So far, we have studied the two major criticisms on capitalism, the social criticism as well as the artistic criticism. Let us now move on with the conservative criticism on capitalism. The conservative criticism, like the social criticism, is preoccupied with the social question. But in contrast to the social criticism, it associates itself with the question of moral order. It considers capitalism to be immoral or leading to immoral orders. Now the conservatives start off with the first critique in terms of labor. They believe that labor is precious because it contributes to moral education and provides a path to virtuous life. Not because, as in the social criticism, it is through labor that man expresses his humanity. So, labor is basically a reflection of the moral behavior of human beings. This leads to the criticism of the ideal lifestyle of the rich, living a life of luxury, living an idle life, who have time to develop their own sensual appetites. And it is believed that this lifestyle, this rich lifestyle, leads to bad morals. In other words, according to the conservative critiques, wealth leads to immoral behavior or order. Again, from the perspective of the poor, lack of wealth also creates bad moral or immoral order. The conservatives are of the opinion that the lack of work for the poor who depend on the rich for their work is also a source of moral disorder, and it has led to encouragement of drunkenness and immoral behavior. Thus, we can see that the conservatives have rooted wealth as the cause of all moral evils, in which both the rich and the poor are equally to be blamed. And they believe that capitalism is responsible for the creation of this evil order or bad moral order. Capitalism, to the conservative critiques, accelerates impoverishment by encouraging the rural exodus and abandonment of working on the land, increases the vulnerability of all existence, making it easier for people to become rich in a short span of time. It fosters construction of gigantic enterprises which, through the effect of numbers and geographical distance, prevent the upkeep of personal connection between the rich and the poor, and this is reprehensible. See, here the conservatives are of the opinion that this mass exodus of the peasantry leaving their traditional livelihood and working as laborers in the cities and factories is also a negative impact of capitalism. The problem does not lie in the unfair distribution of economic value and the lack of freedom for the masses. It lies in the disintegration and moral decline of the social order. This is where the conservative criticism is different from the social criticism. The conservative critics focus on the root cause of immorality, where they feel that the traditional livelihood, traditional way of living has given way to a rich capitalist culture. Conservative thought is organic and functionalist. The classes are interdependent, parts of a whole which are naturally differentiated, and they live under unequal conditions. A man's dignity, according to the conservatives, depend on their morals, his virtues, his merits, his behavior, which are accessible to all, rich as well as poor. And the virtue of the rich is to understand that it is their duty to look after people who are poor. So the conservatives believe that capitalist system has destroyed the morality, the morals of both the rich as well as the poor. Let us now move on to the fourth and the final criticism, that is the ecological criticism of capitalism. The ecological critique challenges the ability of the capitalist system to guarantee the future of mankind, beginning with reproducibility. The focus is no longer on the indignation of the workers' lot. The focus is no longer on the misery and impoverishment of the working class. The destructive selfishness of the dominant class or the disciplinary nature of society. Capitalism, by its very operation, is leading directly to the destruction of civilization. This is the ecological crisis, which is the result of the capitalist production system. Let us go a little deeper into the ecological critique. One speciality of the ecological criticism is that, in the strictest sense, it appears to have no particular preference for any political model. It neither advocates nor denies a political model. It is possible, according to the ecological critiques, to be anti-democracy and pro-ecology. Some even think that only a strong authoritarian state will be capable of preventing the distaste as well as the disastrous impact of individual selfishness. The ecological critiques are of the opinion that it is possible to prevent the civilizational disaster if we check capitalist accumulation. So to them, a strong authoritarian state may be the answer to a check on the civilizational disaster which capitalism is bringing. Individual liberty can be a bad counselor. And in deep ecology, equality is to be shared with all living species, please note, who have an equal claim to life. It's not just human beings or workers or capitalists. Will human beings be capable of such sharing without being constrained to do so? Will human beings consider all living species to be equal in worth? In contrast, there are many ecologists who combine their criticism with the libertarian social criticism and promote the opposite political model. These ecologists consider that the problem lies in the large-scale industrialization and the mass society, which can only be effectively fought by challenging the hierarchical and technocratic political model that makes them function. Therefore, they believe that it is time to check on the mass consumption pattern of the population facilitated by capitalist production system. The ecological criticism is also divided between two groups. Advocates of the first group, they opine that we should return to the organizational models of traditional societies that use fewer resources and are more respectful towards nature, with their modestly sized self-governing communities. In other words, these advocates propound back to nature, living a minimalist life, living a simple life. On the other hand, there is another group within the ecologist critique who are called the modernists, who believe that only technical progress can help us save the planet through renewable energies, advances in genetic engineering and agronomy, information technologies, and these options are more compatible with capitalist development. Therefore, the ecologist critique focuses on two answers to the capitalist crisis. They believe that the crisis can be averted. One, by going back to the traditional system of living amidst nature, and second, the modernists who believe that we need more technological progress, more development, more advancement, because if you want to arrest environmental decline, nature decline, you need to use technologies, advanced technologies, which can only come with capitalist development. Thus, they are divided on whether we should go back to traditional way of life or move forward with greater advancement in capitalism. Based on these four criticisms, let us now try to conclude what we have studied so far. Some critiques of capitalism that were once at the center of attention have moved to the margins. So, the critique of capitalism has continuously changed and transformed itself. If you look into the condition of the workers or the concept of alienation of workers, marginalization of workers under the capitalist system, this entire question of workers' plight has shifted to the margins. The capitalist critique is no longer confined to workers' alienation, which were once the central point of Marx and Engels' writing. This is true for Marxist critique of capitalism as a site of alienation of labor and the immiserization of the working class. In most economically developed parts of the world, the labor question has ceased to be explosive and has ceased to have mobilizing effect. It used to display in the 19th or in the first part of the 20th century. This can be observed in the fact that labor movements, trade union movements have declined. Nevertheless, at the global level, it deserves to be rediscovered given the massive spreads of the so-called informal labor under conditions of capitalist exploitation of the global south. So while questions of labor exploitation may have changed from the social critique, but definitely there are new types of criticisms which are coming up, bringing in the question of the global south and the capitalist impact. Certainly, there are others who, instead of criticizing capitalism, defend capitalism in the public debate. They feel that capitalism will lead to economic and societal progress and development, and therefore capitalism is required and not to be critiqued. They have good arguments which demonstrate its achievements in alliance with progress and the beneficial impact of capitalism over centuries. However, by and large, we need to understand that the critical, skeptical, pessimistic arguments, connotations, and overtones still dominate capitalism, particularly since the Great Recession of 2008, both in public debates as well as in relevant parts of social sciences. That's all for today. Thank you.